So, in frame of this subsection, we are going to talk about different types of experiments which we are able to conduct applying a simulation modeling. So, the final goal of experimentation is not simply to run the model many times, but to obtain sufficient statistical information that can meaningfully support the decision making. In other words, we design experiments so that our conclusions are based on evidence rather than intuition or random variation. In this context, an experiment can be understood simply as a simulation run with clear defined input conditions. In practice, we usually perform many such runs to account for randomness, as we have already discussed. There are different types of experiments depending on what kind of decision or understanding we're seeking. If our main purpose is to support decisions, we often use optimization and what-if analysis. So talking about optimization, the key goal of optimization is to find input values which minimize or maximize performance. Talking about what-if analysis, it can be stated that in what-if analysis we evaluate the impact of specific design. So it's like we are testing our ideas of what we would like to change. If our goal is probably not the decision making, but to understand the behavior of the system, so there are two more types of experiments, and one of them is screening experiment, and the following type of experiment actually would be really very helpful to identify which factors significantly impact system behavior. And one more is a sensitivity analysis. A following type of experiment is utilized to test how results change when inputs vary. So choosing the right experiment type should always be driven by the decision we want to support. So the following table summarizes the key differences between the main types of simulation experiments which we have just discussed. As you're able to recognize, the table shows us the following aspects like a main purpose, decision versus understanding, number of factors, type of change tested, typical output, and finally when to use the specific type of the experiment. So please just press stop and explore the following table. I believe this one is a very useful source of information to catch up which type of experiment would be valuable in frame of your research or your project. So before running any simulation experiment, we need to carefully plan and organize them. The following slide summarizes the key elements that must be defined in advance. So first of all, we need to think about the specific type of the experiments which is valuable in frame of our study. A second one, we need to define the input data for each experiment. And finally, we need to establish a clear data collection strategy. The key message here would be the following, that a good experiment design produces us reliable data, and reliable data gives us credible decisions. What-if analysis is one of the most commonly used types of simulation experiments. In simple terms, it is the capability to formulate hypotheses and then test how those assumptions would impact the system. Instead of predicting the future, we explore possible futures. More formally, what-if analysis aims to inspect the behavior of a complex system, at example as enterprise or transport network or production process. Of course, we are considering different assumptions, and this one we are calling scenarios. So, for example, what would happen to a production system if we introduce an additional quality control stage? How would system performance change if the number of orders doubled? What would be the effect on visitor satisfaction if we reduce the number of service operators to 2? In all those cases, simulation allows us to compare the system behavior before and after the change, providing evidence for a decision making.